I'm holding something that shouldn't exist. This is the personal war diary of General Hans-Jürgen Stumpff, Luftwaffe High Command, March 1944. Most of these diaries were destroyed before the fall of Berlin, but this one survived. March 6, 1944. Stumpff recorded the events of that day hour by hour. 14 entries, detailed observations, technical notes, and then at 2100 hours, he stopped writing details. He wrote one word: Fertig. Finished. Not the mission, not the day. Germany, Berlin, March 6, 1944, 11:47 a.m. The air raid sirens began at 11:47. General Hans-Jürgen Stumpff was in his office at Luftwaffe Reich headquarters when the first warnings came through. He had heard these sirens hundreds of times. Berlin had been bombed before. The British came at night. Darkness and clouds. Hit and run. But this was different. The reports coming in from the Western radar stations were impossible. Herr General Oberst, we're counting over 1,000 aircraft inbound. Stumpff looked at the young lieutenant. 1,000? Yes, sir. American heavy bombers, flying in formation, broad daylight. Stumpff walked to the window. The sky was clear, bright winter sun, perfect visibility. The Americans were coming in daylight, in formation, over Berlin. He picked up the telephone, direct line to fighter command. How many interceptors can we put up? The answer made his hand tighten around the receiver. 150 aircraft, Herr General Oberst. Perhaps 170 if we scramble everything. 150 German fighters against 1,000 American bombers. Stumpff had fought in the First World War. He'd commanded fighter wings. He'd planned defensive operations across 3 fronts. He understood numbers. He understood mathematics. This wasn't a battle. This was arithmetic. But he didn't write Fertig yet, not at 11:47, because what Stumpff didn't know, what the radar operators couldn't tell him, was that the count was wrong. It wasn't 1,000 aircraft. It was 1,900, 1,200 B-17 flying fortresses, 700 P-51 Mustang fighter escorts. The largest daylight bombing raid in history was about to arrive over the capital of the Third Reich, and there was nothing Stumpff could do to stop it. 12:15 p.m. Observation post, Luftwaffe Reich headquarters. Stumpff climbed to the roof observation platform. He brought his adjutant, Major Wilhelm Herget. He brought his diary. The sirens were still wailing. Civilians were flooding into the U-Bahn stations, into the bunkers, into the cellars. 3 million people trying to hide. Herget pointed west. Herr General Oberst, there. Stumpff raised his binoculars. The first formation appeared on the horizon. Silver specks against blue sky. Then more formations. Then more. They kept coming. The Americans flew in combat boxes, tight formations, 54 bombers per box. The boxes stacked in layers, high squadron, lead squadron, low squadron. Each box a flying fortress of interlocking machine gun fire. Stumpff counted 12 boxes in the first wave, 648 bombers. He lowered his binoculars. He checked his watch. 12:17. He raised them again. Another wave was appearing behind the first. Mein Gott, Herget whispered. Stumpff didn't respond. He was watching something he'd been told was impossible. Something Hermann Göring himself had declared could never happen. The Americans were bombing Berlin in broad daylight, flying in perfect formation, as if the Luftwaffe didn't exist. And the sky was still full of them. More boxes, more waves. The contrails from their engines were drawing white lines across the sky. Parallel lines, geometric patterns, like a grid being laid over the city. Stumpff had flown combat missions in 1918. He'd seen formations of 20 aircraft and thought it was impressive. He'd commanded wings of 50 fighters and considered it a powerful force. He was looking at nearly 2,000 aircraft, all American, all here to destroy his city. He opened his diary. He noted the time, 12:21. He wrote, "First wave sighted. Estimate 600 plus heavy bombers, multiple waves following." But he didn't write Fertig yet, because the mathematics hadn't finished revealing itself. 12:33 p.m. The sound arrives. You heard them before you saw them up close. The B-17 Flying Fortress had 4 Wright R-1820 Cyclone engines. Each engine produced 1,200 horsepower. Each engine created a distinctive deep throb. Multiply that by 1,200 aircraft. The sound was physical. It pressed against your chest. It vibrated in your bones. It was the sound of industrial power, the sound of American factories working 24 hours a day, the sound of a nation that could build bombers faster than Germany could build rifle bullets. Stumpff felt it through the concrete of the observation platform. Herget was staring at the sky, mouth open. The first wave was directly overhead now. The combat boxes were so tight you could see the individual bombers. Olive-drab fuselages, white stars on the wings, nose art, names painted on the sides. Memphis Belle II, Hell's Angels, Yankee Doodle. Each bomber carried 10 men, 1,200 bombers, 12,000 American boys over Berlin. And behind them, weaving through the formations like hunting wolves, 700 P-51 Mustangs. Silver fighters with checkered noses, drop tanks under the wings. They'd flown all the way from England, 500 miles, just to protect the bombers. Stumph's interceptors were starting to arrive. He could see them, tiny dots, BF-109s, FW-190s, climbing desperately. 150 fighters trying to break up formations of 1,200 bombers protected by 700 escorts. The math was brutal, 8 American fighters for every German. But Stumpf was watching something else, something that made the mathematics even worse. The bombers weren't breaking formation. When the Luftwaffe fighters attacked, the bomber boxes held together. They maintained position. They kept flying. And when a German fighter got too close, 50 machine guns would open fire simultaneously. He watched an FW-190 make a head-on pass at a combat box. 20 bombers fired at once. The FW-190 disintegrated, just came apart in mid-air, pieces spinning down through the sky. The bomber box kept flying, perfect formation, as if nothing had happened. Stumpf lowered his binoculars. He looked at Herget. "How many bombers have we shot down?" Herget had a radio. He was listening to the fighter command frequency. "So far, Herr Generaloberst, 4 confirmed kills, maybe 6. 4 bombers down." Stumpf looked up. The sky was still dark with American aircraft. The first wave was over the city center now. The second wave was approaching from the west. A third wave was visible on the horizon. They'd shot down 4. The Americans had brought 1,200. 4 divided by 1,200 equals 0.33%. 0.33% losses. Stumpf opened his diary again. He started to write, but his hand stopped, because that's when the bombs began to fall. 12:41 p.m. The bombs fall. The first bombs whistled down at 12:41. Stumpf watched them through his binoculars. Small dark shapes detaching from the bellies of the B-17s, tumbling, falling, picking up speed. Each B-17 carried approximately 4,000 pounds of bombs, 1,200 bombers, 4.8 million pounds of high explosives, 4.8 million pounds falling on Berlin. The explosions began in the western districts, Charlottenburg, Tiergarten, Rolling Thunder. The ground shook, windows shattered in the headquarters building 3 miles away. Herget grabbed the railing. Stumpf kept his binoculars steady. He was counting. The combat boxes flew in a precise pattern. Lead bombardier drops. The entire formation drops on his signal. 54 bombers releasing simultaneously. 1 box, 216,000 pounds in approximately 3 seconds. Stumpf watched the second box release, then the third. The western part of the city was disappearing under smoke and fire, block after block. The explosions were merging into a continuous roar. You couldn't distinguish individual detonations anymore. It was just one long rolling crescendo of destruction, and the Americans were still coming. Wave 2 was overhead now, another 600 bombers. Their bomb bay doors were opening. Stumpff lowered his binoculars. He turned to Herget. "Get me a casualty estimate as soon as possible, and damage reports from each district." "Yes, Herr Generaloberst." But Stumpff wasn't thinking about casualties. Not yet. He was thinking about something else, something that made his throat tight. Production, 12:58 p.m. The mathematics of industrial power. In Stumpp's diary, there's a calculation, written at 12:58, March 6, 1944. He did the math while the bombs were still falling. He calculated how long it would take Germany to replace the 4 bombers they'd shot down. The answer was 17 days. Germany could produce approximately 1 B-17 equivalent every 4 days. 4 bombers meant 17 days of maximum production. Therefore, 1 raid, 1 afternoon. The Luftwaffe had managed to delay American bomber production by 17 days. But then Stumpff calculated something else. He calculated how long it would take America to replace the 69 bombers they were going to lose today. Because intelligence estimated that the Americans would lose approximately 60 aircraft on a raid this size, shot down, damaged beyond repair, missing, 69 B-17 flying fortresses. At American production rates, how long to replace them? Stumpff wrote the number in his diary. 4 days. America could replace 69 heavy bombers in 4 days. Germany needed 17 days to build 4. The mathematics were impossible, but it got worse, because Stumpff then calculated how many bombers America was currently building. His intelligence reports said the Americans had multiple production facilities. Boeing in Seattle, Douglas in Long Beach, Vega in Burbank, Lockheed, Consolidated. The reports estimated American production at approximately 16 B-17s per day. 16 per day meant 112 per week, 448 per month. Germany's entire bomber production, all types combined, was approximately 200 aircraft per month. America was building more B-17s alone than Germany was building total aircraft. And that didn't count the B-24 Liberators, or the P-51 fighters, or the transport planes, or the trainers. Stumpff looked up from his calculations. The third wave was dropping bombs now. The smoke over Berlin was so thick he couldn't see the ground anymore, just fire and smoke and the dark shapes of buildings collapsing. Somewhere down there, civilians were dying. His civilians. German families who'd believed Göring when he promised that no enemy bomber would ever reach Berlin. If enemy bombers reach the Ruhr, Göring had said in 1939, "You can call me Meyer." Berlin was burning. You could call him Meyer. 1:17 p.m. The fighter battle continues. The Luftwaffe was still trying. Stumpff could see them, individual fighters making desperate attacks, climbing, diving, trying to break up the formations. An FW-190 came screaming down from above. Vertical dive, 4 cannons firing, tracer rounds stitching across a B-17's wing. The B-17's number 3 engine caught fire. Black smoke. The bomber dropped out of formation, falling behind. The P-51 escorts pounced immediately. 3 Mustangs dove on the FW-190. The German pilot tried to evade, rolled, dove, but the P-51s were faster, more maneuverable. They had the altitude advantage. The FW-190 exploded. The damaged B-17 was still flying, still heading east, trying to make it out of German airspace. 2 P-51s tucked in beside it. Escort, protection, 1 bomber damaged, 1 fighter destroyed. The mathematics continued. Stumpff watched another German fighter make an attack run. Bf-109, head-on pass against a combat box, the most dangerous attack, flying directly at 50 bombers, 500 machine guns pointing at you. The pilot was brave, committed. He held his course, fired his cannons, 20-millimeter rounds punching into a B-17's nose. Then the bomber formation fired back. The Bf-109 was hit by at least 30 rounds simultaneously. The fighter came apart, fuselage, wings, engine, pieces tumbling through the sky. The B-17 he'd hit kept flying, nose section damaged, plexiglass shattered, but still in formation, still dropping bombs. Herget was on the radio again. Herr General Oberst, Fighter Command reports 18 aircraft lost, 12 pilots killed, 4 wounded, 2 missing. 18 fighters lost. Stumpff checked his watch. 1:23. The raid had been going on for 96 minutes, 18 fighters in 96 minutes. He looked at the sky. The American formations were still perfect, still intact. The third wave was turning south now, heading back toward England. The second wave was following. The first wave was already gone, disappearing to the west. Behind them, Berlin was burning, and Stumpff finally understood what he was watching. This wasn't a military operation. This was a demonstration. The Americans weren't trying to destroy Berlin. Not really, not yet. They were showing Germany what they could do. They were demonstrating that they could fly 1,900 aircraft over the Reich capital in broad daylight. That they could lose 60 bombers and replace them in 4 days. That they could do this again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. They were showing Germany the future. A future where American bombers darkened the sky every single day, where German fighters couldn't stop them, where German production couldn't match them, where German cities burned one after another until there was nothing left. Stumpff opened his diary. He wrote the time. 13:28. He wrote one sentence. The Luftwaffe cannot win this war. But he still didn't write Fertig, because he needed to see one more thing. 2:14 p.m. Waiting for the count. Stumpff stayed on the observation platform. The smoke over Berlin was still rising. Massive columns of black and gray reaching thousands of feet into the air. The fires would burn for days. The rescue crews were already digging through rubble. The casualty reports were starting to come in. But Stumpff wasn't watching the city. He was watching the western sky, waiting, because the Americans had to come back. They'd flown east over Berlin, dropped their bombs. Now they had to fly home, back across Germany, back across occupied Europe, 500 miles to England, and every German fighter that could still fly was waiting for them. The Luftwaffe had lost 18 fighters in the first attack, but reinforcements were arriving. Fresh squadrons from airfields to the south and north, planes that had been held in reserve, planes that had been grounded for maintenance and were rushed back into service. Fighter Command was estimating 200 aircraft available for the return attack, 200 German fighters against the returning American formations. This was the Luftwaffe's second chance. The bombers were heading home. They'd expended their bombs. They were low on fuel. Some were damaged. This was when they were vulnerable. This was when the mathematics might change. Stumpff raised his binoculars. He waited. 2:47 p.m. The Americans return. They appeared from the east, the same formations, the same combat boxes, flying west, heading home. But something was different. Stumpff adjusted his binoculars, focused, counted. The formations were smaller, gaps where bombers should be. Empty spaces in the combat boxes. Some boxes were down to 40 aircraft. Some had 38. The tight geometric patterns were broken. The Americans had taken losses. Herget was beside him with updated reports. Intelligence estimates 64 American bombers destroyed or missing. Another 87 damaged. Some may not make it back to England. 64 confirmed losses. Stumpff felt something. Not hope. Hope was too strong a word, but something. A small, cold calculation. If every raid cost the Americans 60 bombers, if Germany could maintain that loss rate, maybe the mathematics could change. Maybe. He watched the German fighters climbing to intercept. 200 Bf-109s and FW-190s against approximately 1,100 returning B-17s. Still protected by 600 P-51 Mustangs. The odds were better than the morning, Not good, but better. The 1st German formation attacked at 2:51, 40 Bf-109s, diving from altitude, attacking a damaged combat box that had fallen behind the main formation. The box had 32 bombers. Several were trailing smoke. One had an engine out. They were struggling to maintain altitude. The Bf-109s came down in a coordinated attack, flights of 4, focusing fire on individual bombers. This was proper tactics, textbook Luftwaffe doctrine. Stumpff watched through his binoculars. The lead Bf-109 fired. Cannon rounds hit a B-17's tail section. The tail gunner stopped firing. The tail structure was damaged. But then the P-51 escorts arrived. They'd been waiting, circling above. They dove on the attacking Bf-109s from behind, from above, from the sun. The German formation scattered. 3 Bf-109s were shot down in the first pass. Just gone, spinning down in flames. The rest tried to evade. But the P-51s were faster. They stayed on the Germans, hunting them. Stumpff watched 5 more Bf-109s go down in 2 minutes. 8 German fighters destroyed. 1 American bomber damaged further. The damaged B-17 was still flying. The mathematics weren't changing. They were getting worse. 3:22 p.m. The final count begins. By 3:22, the American formations had passed beyond visual range. The raid was over. Berlin was burning. The smoke columns were visible for 50 miles. The all-clear sirens were sounding. Civilians were emerging from shelters. Medics were treating the wounded. Firefighters were battling blazes that would burn for 3 more days. Stumpff returned to his office. Herget followed with preliminary reports. Casualty estimates, Herr Generaloberst. Approximately 600 civilians killed, 2,000 wounded. Extensive damage to residential areas. The Bulla dairy plant destroyed. Railway infrastructure damaged. Electrical grid partially down. Stumpff sat at his desk, opened his diary. And our losses? Herget consulted his notes. 41 fighters destroyed, 16 pilots killed, 12 wounded, 7 missing. An additional 23 aircraft damaged beyond immediate repair. 41 fighters against 64 American bombers. Stumpff wrote the numbers down. He did the calculation. Germany lost 41 fighters to destroy 64 bombers, a ratio of approximately 1.5 to 1. On the surface, that looked acceptable. The defenders were inflicting more losses than they were taking, but then Stumpff calculated something else. Time to replace losses. Germany could produce approximately 8 Bf-109s per day. 41 fighters meant 5 days of production to replace. America could produce 16 B-17s per day. 64 bombers meant 4 days of production to replace. Germany needed 5 days to recover from this battle. America needed 4 days, and that assumed both sides stopped fighting. No more raids, no more losses, just production. But Stumpff knew the Americans wouldn't stop. They'd be back tomorrow, or the next day, with another 1,200 bombers, and Germany would lose another 40 fighters, and the day after that, 40 more. The mathematics were exponential. Every raid, Germany lost pilots it couldn't replace, experienced men, veterans, men who'd survived the Battle of Britain, the Eastern Front, North Africa. Major Hermann Graf. 54 kills, dead over Berlin. Hauptmann Wilhelm Moritz, 42 kills, missing. Oberleutnant Otto Schneider, 37 kills, killed in action. These men had taken years to train, years of combat experience. You couldn't replace that in 4 days. You couldn't build that in a factory. The Americans were losing bombers, but bombers were just aluminum and rivets, 10 men per bomber. But America had millions of men, thousands of pilots in training, an endless supply. Germany was losing the one thing it couldn't replace, experienced fighter pilots, and the Americans were just getting started. 3:58 p.m. Intelligence reports arrive. Herget returned with new information. Herr Generaloberst, Intelligence has confirmed the American force composition. Stumpff looked up from his calculations. Herget continued. The raid consisted of 1,237 B-17 flying fortresses from the 8th Air Force, 704 P-51 Mustang escorts. Additionally, there were diversionary raids by B-24 Liberators hitting targets in western Germany. Another 300 aircraft, 1,500 bombers total, in one day. And intelligence believes, Herget added quietly, that this is not the maximum American capability. Reports indicate that the 8th Air Force has approximately 2,000 heavy bombers available in England. Today's raid used approximately 60% of their strength. Stumpff set down his pen. 2,000 heavy bombers in England. The Americans had used 60%, and they darkened the sky over Berlin. What would 100% look like? He opened a folder on his desk. American industrial production reports, intelligence estimates, some from agents, some from intercepted communications, some from captured documents. The numbers were staggering. America was producing 18 B-17s per day, 12 B-24s per day, 30 heavy bombers per day, 900 per month, 10,800 per year. Germany's total aircraft production, all types combined, was approximately 4,000 per year. America was building 2.7 times as many heavy bombers alone as Germany was building total aircraft, and that was just bombers. The Americans were also building fighters, transports, trainers, observation planes, the consolidated B-24 production line in Michigan, the Boeing plants in Seattle, Douglas in California, Lockheed, North American Aviation. Ford Motor Company had converted automobile factories to build aircraft. The Willow Run plant in Michigan was producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, one bomber per hour. Germany's largest aircraft factory could produce perhaps 3 aircraft per day. Stumpff closed the folder. He looked at his diary. The page was covered with calculations, numbers, ratios, production rates, loss rates, replacement times. All the mathematics pointed the same direction. Germany was going to lose. Not because German pilots weren't brave. They were. Stumpff had watched them attack formations of 50 bombers with no hesitation. They'd fought with skill and courage, not because German aircraft weren't good. The FW-190 was an excellent fighter. The Bf-109 had been the backbone of the Luftwaffe for years. Germany was going to lose because of arithmetic. Simple, cold, unavoidable arithmetic. Stumpff picked up his pen. He looked at the page. March 6, 1944, 2100 hours. He wrote one word. Fertig, finished. That word. Fertig, finished. It's written in neat handwriting. Steady hand. No hesitation. Stumpff didn't scratch it out, didn't second-guess it. He wrote it, closed the diary, and went back to work, because generals don't have the luxury of despair. Here's what happened after March 6, 1944, March 7, 1944. The Americans returned. The next day, less than 24 hours later, the 8th Air Force launched another raid, not on Berlin this time, on targets across western Germany, 600 bombers, 400 fighters. The Luftwaffe scrambled 130 interceptors. They shot down 22 American bombers. They lost 33 German fighters. March 8th. The Americans came again. 800 bombers, 500 escorts. The Luftwaffe lost 41 fighters. March 9th, March 10th, March 11th. Every day, sometimes twice a day. The Americans kept coming. And every day the Luftwaffe lost pilots it couldn't replace, aircraft it couldn't rebuild, time it didn't have. Stumpff's calculation was proving correct. Germany was drowning in arithmetic. April 1944. The cost becomes clear. By April, Luftwaffe fighter losses were catastrophic. In March alone, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 560 fighters over the Reich. 560 experienced pilots killed, wounded, or missing. German training schools were producing approximately 150 new pilots per month. The mathematics were simple. Germany was losing pilots 3.7 times faster than it could train replacements, and the quality was declining. The pilots who died in March had an average of 18 months of combat experience. The replacements arriving in April had an average of 6 weeks of training. 6 weeks. American pilots received approximately 200 hours of flight training before entering combat. German pilots in mid-1944 were receiving approximately 60 hours. Some had less. There are documented cases of German pilots being shot down on their first combat mission. They'd never fired their guns in combat, never practiced high-altitude tactics, never learned how to survive against P-51 Mustangs. They climbed into their Bf-109s, took off, engaged American formations, and died. Stumpff watched this happen. He read the casualty reports. He knew the names. Some of them were boys, 18 years old, 19. He'd written Fertig on March 6th, but the war continued for 13 more months. The question no one asked: why didn't Stumpff tell anyone? He realized Germany had lost. On March 6, 1944, 13 months before the surrender. Why didn't he tell Hitler, tell Goering, tell someone? The answer is in his diary. March 15, 1944, 9 days after Berlin, Stumpff wrote, discussed strategic situation with Goering, presented loss rates and production estimates. Goering dismissed the analysis. Said final victory was certain. Said new jet fighters would change everything, ordered me to improve morale among fighter units. Stumpff tried to tell them. They didn't want to hear it. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter did enter service eventually. It was faster than any Allied aircraft. It was deadly. In the hands of experienced pilots, it was nearly unstoppable. Germany produced approximately 1,400 Me-262s before the war ended. America produced 50,000 P-51 Mustangs, 1,400 versus 50,000. The arithmetic didn't change. Hans-Jürgen Stumpff survived the war. He was captured by British forces in May 1945, held as a prisoner of war, interrogated. The British asked him about Berlin, about the daylight raids, about when he knew Germany would lose. Stumpff told them, March 6, 1944, when I saw 1,200 American bombers over Berlin in perfect formation. The interrogator asked why he continued fighting if he knew it was hopeless. Stumpff's answer is recorded in the interrogation transcript. Because I was a German officer, because my men were still fighting, because surrender wasn't my decision to make. He was released in 1947, returned to civilian life, never held a command again. He died in 1968, age 73. His war diary was donated to the Bundesarchiv in 1971. It sat in the archives for decades, uncatalogued, unread, until now. This isn't just a story about one general, one raid, one word in a diary. This is a story about the moment when mathematics became more powerful than courage. The German pilots who fought over Berlin on March 6th were brave, incredibly brave. They attacked formations of 50 bombers knowing they probably wouldn't survive. They did it anyway, but courage couldn't change the arithmetic. Germany couldn't build aircraft fast enough, couldn't train pilots fast enough, couldn't replace losses fast enough, and the Americans had figured out that they didn't need to be better. They just needed to be more. More bombers, more fighters, more pilots, more production. The American strategy wasn't elegant. It wasn't clever. It was mathematical. Build so many aircraft that German production couldn't compete. Build them so fast that losses didn't matter. Send them in such numbers that German defenses were overwhelmed by simple arithmetic. 1,200 bombers, 700 escorts, 1,900 aircraft over Berlin in one afternoon. It wasn't the biggest raid of the war. By late 1944, the Americans were sending over 2,000 bombers on single missions. But March 6, 1944, was the day a German general realized that no amount of skill, courage, or determination could defeat industrial mathematics. It was the day Hans-Jürgen Stumpff wrote Fertig in his diary. And he was right. If this story moved you, please hit the like button. Every click tells the algorithm that this piece of history deserves to be remembered. We dedicate ourselves to rescuing these forgotten stories from the archives. If you want to join us in this mission, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Where are you watching from? Write in the comments your city or region and tell us if anyone in your family served. Thank you for ensuring that General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpff and the 560 Luftwaffe pilots lost in March 1944 are not forgotten in silence. They fought with courage even when the mathematics made victory impossible. They deserve to be remembered.